Before we get into kicking off this series that I'm very excited about, I wanted to give you just a couple things going on with church-wide stuff. November is Adoption Awareness Month, and so we want to just make you aware of that. We believe that a couple reasons why adoption is such a huge deal in our world. There are so many kids who are orphaned who need good moms and dads. And B, it really is a great illustration of what God has done in adopting us as His sons and daughters. And so I just want to make you aware of that. I'm going to pray for that in a moment. I also want to make you aware just that there's a lot of things going on in our church in regards to moms and dads and kids. Just this week alone, literally in the last 7 days, on Sunday night, I had a couple in our church come to Shauna and I and say, hey, we're pregnant with our first child. Later on this week, we had a good friend of ours who's a part of our church that's involved in a custody issue. And Tuesday, I get a call from one of our key leaders saying that his wife had lost their baby. They just found out they were pregnant. And so literally, all of those things have happened in the last 7 days. And so one of the things we say around here is that we want to celebrate with each other. And right now, we have lots of people, like those first-timers. We have 2 couples in our church that are pregnant and due with baby girls in February. And so they've already made a friendship pact, even though they're not out of the womb yet. In fact, those moms are actually sitting beside each other back there with the dad in the middle. 2 different dads, all right? One of the dads is in the middle. And we're all for diversity here. But and so there's what we say here at the church is that we want to celebrate the greatest highs we experience with one another. We want to be family here. At the same time, we want to learn what it's like to weep together and mourn together as we go through struggles. And I know those are just some of the stories I know. I know that every person in this room probably has they're riding high on something or maybe you're struggling with something. And so I want to pray for Adoption Awareness Month. I want to pray for people in our church regardless of what they're going through. And I want to pray for you as we get into this, what I think can be a profound, impacting series called Storytellers. Let's pray. God, I'm grateful for who's here this morning. God, I'm grateful that even though we meet at 2 different times, you're building a single church here. And so, God, we want to celebrate with one another the great joys, and we want to really rally around each other as we go through things that are very difficult. God, I thank you that so often in the Bible you refer to your church as a family. God, may you make us more like family here, regardless of growth and how big things get. Could we just be one big family? Could we be there to root for each other? Could we be there to comfort each other? God, realizing that the greatest joy comes from you and the greatest comfort comes from you, that you've allowed us as your children to really channel that to other people. And so may we do that for each other in this church. May we do it in our city and in our world. God, I pray that you would be with orphans all over the world. God, I pray that they would see you as Father. And yet at the same time, God, I pray that you would give them a great dad and a great mom. God, if you would call any of us in this room to adoption, God, I pray that that would be a strong vision you would give us and it would be very clear. Pray that you would help fund adoptions for people in our church who are wanting to do that. And God, I pray that you will be with the people in our church who are hurting. God, that you will also be with the people who are celebrating. And may we learn how to live life together, irrespective of our current circumstances. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm glad you're here. You know, we really thought that the 9:30 service would be its largest ever this day, and it was. Literally, 9:30 service had twice as many people as it had last week. And this is the only day. Some of you want 25 hours in a day. Some of you beg for that. You get it today. Like today literally is, you probably wasted it already. But today is the only day of the year where there will be 25 hours in a day. So there you go. All of you who need it to be more productive in your lives, God has given you one day to be 25 hours. I hope you make the most of it. So we think that the 9:30 is definitely the most, it was crowded more than ever today. And we assume that when we lose the hour in the spring, that there will be no one at the 9:30 service. And so I told my staff, don't get too excited. It's going to be weighted the other way whenever we get to the spring. And so excited that you're here. Can you imagine our lives if there were no such things as stories? Like, life would be terrible, wouldn't it? Like, we don't like bad stories, but if there were no stories, there would be no movies, right? There would be no books. There would be no TV shows. What's your favorite TV show on right now? Not The Office? What? Modern Family. What else? Parks and Recreation. Anything else? Big Bang Theory, Grey's Anatomy. Awesome. So I don't watch any of those, but I probably need to. Anybody know when the new Alcatraz show is beginning? Has it already begun? It looks like it's going to be incredible. Hurley from Lost is on there. Anyway, I think it's going to be great. And we kind of have sort of this, familiarity with that whole idea. So if anybody finds out when that's coming, text me by the end of the day, and I will give you a free Epic Journal. Seriously. All right? Get the first person that gets you're like, Pastor, we don't know your number. figure it out. No, email me. Do this. Email me, ben@epicsf.com. Don't search for it in church. Internet doesn't work so well if you haven't figured that out yet, unless you have Verizon, I'm told. But the first person to email the pastor, get a free journal, maybe even a free lunch out of the deal. So Alcatraz, when does it come on? I don't want to know East Coast time. I don't care about the Central. Give it to me Pacific time, and we'll go from there. Here's the deal about stories. It's one thing, we all enjoy experiencing a good story sort of from the outside, like sort of watching other people's stories, whether it's on TV or at the movies, or even friends we have in our lives, and we sort of hear what's going on in their lives. But it's not quite the same as being in the story, is it? I mean, and it's not a selfish desire that we want to be in the story. It's just this thing, we want to be an active participant in what's going on. We want to be a part of something real significant. And so, when we come into this series, what I know is true, that some of us have sort of secondhand accounts of what God has done in other people's lives. And that's great. We need to root for other people, root for each other. But what I'm hoping will happen and transpire because of what we do in this series is that you and I will have sort of our own stories to tell. Like, we'll actually be able to go, hey, I don't know what God's doing in that person's life, but let me tell you how God is transforming me. That's my hope. The reason we started Epic really has to do with a couple things. Well, first of all, it's real easy to spell, and Pastor needed something that was easy to spell. But the main two reasons, one is this, that we wanted it to be a church beyond the ordinary or status quo. So something that's of epic proportion. We do it in a humorous way, but that's what we mean by that. And secondly, the idea of epic as a tell, as really this story, this grand story, because here's what we started this church to do. For people like you to find out that God's writing a really big story in history, and that you and I, every single one of us, have been invited to participate in that story. And so we really want to give ourselves, if God will allow, I want to give the rest of my life to leading people at our church to understand who He is, what the story is that He's writing, and what your part is in that, and then say to you, go leverage your role, go use it and live it up as much as you can for the good of the story He's writing. That's my hope. That's my prayer. So we'll start off this series talking about people encountered Jesus in the history in which we see in the Bible. People encountered Jesus, and because of that, they left with amazing stories to tell. And I'm just curious if God would do something in our lives so profound that we can walk out of here on Sundays and throughout our small groups during the week with our own story to tell. First story takes place in John chapter 9. If you need a Bible, raise your hands and one will be distributed to you. This is our gift to you. If you need it, you can keep it forever. You can keep it just for this morning. You can write a note to the person who will get it next week. Whatever works for you. If you receive one of those gift Bibles, again, that's yours to keep if you want it. If you have that Bible, either from this morning or before, page 582 is where you'll find John chapter 9. John chapter 9. John's one of the four Gospels in the New Testament. It goes Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so John chapter 9 is where our story is. And I really want you and I to get into this story to see what this guy's story was and then what happens on the back end. So if you'll stand with me, that would be a great way we can honor God's word that we're reading here, see what He has to say to us, and ask Him to bless it. We'll read the first 7 verses to begin. It says, that's Jesus, as Jesus passed by, He saw a man blind from birth. And His disciples asked Him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, He spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then He anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. You can be seated. We'll go throughout chapter, bless you, first of all. That was one of those definitely have to bless right from the stage. That's a powerful one. We're going to go a few places in chapter 9, but I want us to begin by getting the gist of what's going on. So Jesus and His disciples are passing by. There's a man there that's been blind since birth. And here's the understanding you and I can know the disciples have. They think there's a correlation between deformity or a deficiency in people that's related to someone doing something wrong. So they ask this question. Who is it that sinned? Rabbi, who sinned, this man, verse 2, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So they live with this belief that if there's something wrong with you, if there's a physical deformity or physical ailment, that you must have done something wrong, or someone that's in your family or close to you must have done something wrong. And so right off the bat, I just want to say this. Listen, you and I, we don't have deficiencies necessarily because we've done something wrong. I'll give you a couple reasons why we have deficiencies. One is we have deficiencies because we're not God, right? You need to look at your neighbor and just say, hey, you're not God. Anybody got a God complex in the room? All right, so we're deficient because we're not God. But secondly, we're deficient in some areas so that the one who is God might show himself and display himself and do something in our lives that only he could do. All right? Deficiency. And so Jesus says, hey, this man, he didn't sin. His parents didn't sin. The reason is that the works of God might be displayed in his life. We, if we're honest, hate having and recognizing deficiencies in our lives, don't we? Like every one of us is good at something in the room. I'm just making sure that's true before we go on. Everybody's good at something, right? Are you good at something? Like, can you just get one thing? Like, besides video games, guys, can you get one thing that you can rock? So we're all kind of good at one thing, but some of us, though we may be great at certain things, we hate and we lament the fact that we're not great at everything, don't we? And so you buy like books for dummies on how to do this and that. And some things you're just never going to be good at. Like you just aren't going to be able to provide or to produce on your own. Like Brad, even though I'm Brad's boss technically, he's never going to let me sing up here. Like, and you don't want him to. Like even though I can give like an executive order, it's still not going to pass. Like, I'm just not getting up here with a microphone while there's music playing. There's no way. And you don't want that to happen. There's things that you hate that you can't do. You hate that you're not perfect in. You hate that you have to carry around weaknesses. And here's what I want to say to every one of us. Because while we're all good at something, there are things that every one of us are horrible at. And if you don't know, like if you're the guy or girl in the room, it's like, I'm not sure that applies to me, just ask us. All right? Just ask us. Like, you're like, no, seriously, what am I bad at? And just, we'll sort of do a kind of a reality TV deal in your life for 1 week. And then we'll come and play it back, and we'll all figure it out together what your thing is. All right? So we all have something that we're not good at. But listen to this. God has left space in each of our lives for his work to be displayed. God has left space. He's left margin. He's left room in our lives for his work to be displayed. Jesus says, hey, the reason this man's born blind, he didn't do this for everyone. He didn't heal everyone. But he says in this situation, the reason that he was born blind is so that something might happen in his life that only God could get credit or glory or value from. Does that make sense? So Jesus is going, there's nothing wrong with this man. But he was left with this deficiency so that God's work might be displayed. And you and I have some deficiencies. Some of those God wants to change. Some of those he just wants to change us in. But some of those he wants to change. And I don't know what it will be for you. But what is your thing? What is your thing in life that if God doesn't do something about it, you'll never get there on your own? Like, I don't know about you, but when you think about a list, like in your life, I know in my life, I think about a list of things I do well and things I don't do well. It seems like the don't do well list gets really, really long. I've got about 2 things that I do well. Like I'm funny. Point proven. And God's given me a gift of teaching. I mean, you may debate that when we're done. But, like, and everything else is on the like I can't do list. Like, seriously. Like, here's the deal. If I ever become patient in my life, it will not be because I did it. Right? Like, I want it done, and I wanted it done yesterday. I know you didn't know what I wanted done, but I still wanted it done yesterday. And so when I hope I'm on some journey towards that, but if I become a patient person, it will be because God did something to bring me to that place. What about you? When I was a freshman in college, the spring of 1996, anybody else? Freshman, 95 or 96? Anybody? Bueller? Once? Carrie? Right there? Some of you are like, I do not remember. Like, I don't remember. You probably weren't. And so I was a freshman there. I took a public speaking class. Thought it would be real easy. And the night before the first speech, we were told to, the night before the first speech when this happened, we had been told to do a 5-minute speech on any topic that we wanted. So, Tom, I was actually going to do one on fielding a ground ball. Like literally fielding a baseball, something I'd done since I was 5, knew backwards and frontwards, sideways, all of those things. But I was so terrified the night before the speech that I literally never went back to the class. I did drop it. Some of you are going, did he drop it in time? I did. All right? Like some of us just have that wired in us. Like I wonder if he made the cutoff or did he just take the F? I dropped it in time. All right? For those of you that are nervous about that situation. Anybody ever not drop a class in time and it cost you? Anybody? Like this? No, great. I knew you were all studs or liars. Perfect. And so, literally, and again, I've got a long way to go in this area, but it's amazing that I went from being terrified of that, and now God has given me a privilege. Literally, I make part of my income put food on the table for my kids and my wife by public speaking. And do you ever think that I will get to a place where I go, man, I have done so well with this? No, even if nobody else in the crowd knows, I know where it started. I know that I was scared to death to stand up in front of 30 of my peers and talk about baseball for 5 whole minutes. So God leaves space in our lives so that when He does something or when something changes dramatically, when we're transformed, any area of our life, including our hearts forever, He does things or leaves us in situations so that when something else is a different outcome, He gets the glory for it. And He wants to do that in some of the circumstances in your life. There are some things that you need to grow in, and yet you've tried and tried and tried. You've tried the self-help book. You've tried going to the class. You've tried like beating yourself up over it, whatever it is. And I just want to tell you, you may never get there on your own, but God has created space so that He can do something about it and work in your life. And guess what? You can't then sit at the table of pride. You need to sit at the table of humility. But some of us are we're so driven and we're so wanting to be the best that we can't walk away from the pride thing. And if real transformative work is going to happen in my life and in your life, you will not be able to take credit for it. So we can keep going. I'm going to keep struggling. Like, no, Pastor Ben, I'm going to do this myself. I'm good enough. Some things we can achieve ourselves. Some things, though, without God's help, you'll never be able to advance in it at all. So I just want to say, this man had nothing. His story wasn't that he was a horrible man. It's just that God wanted to do something in his life. And so Jesus spits on the ground, kind of conventional. Some of you are like grossed out, like the word saliva is in the Bible. That makes you grossed out, some of you. Makes mud with his saliva. He anoints the man's eyes with mud. And he says to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means a pool that means sent. It means sent. Now, I want to go into verse 24 and 25 so we can just follow the story. What's happened is that the neighbors of this man who was blind, now he can see, the neighbors have gone to get the Pharisees, who are really the religious rulers of the day. They're the ones who sort of try to control religion, and by controlling religion, they tried and sought to control God Himself. Meaning, they would say things like, God must work in this way, or this is of God, this is of not. And everyone sort of looked to them to have the authority on what was right when it came to things of religion. So keep that in mind. So, because the Pharisees didn't want to recognize Jesus as God, basically they keep asking this man, hey, tell us that story again. So that's what's going on here in verse 24 and 25. It says, so for the second time they, that's the Pharisees, called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man, the Pharisees are talking about Jesus, we know that this man is a sinner. He answered, this is the blind man that now sees. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. Listen, you and I don't have to know everything about Jesus for our lives to be affected by Him. How many of you inspect every condition of an airplane before you fly? Seriously. Like, Ben, that's crazy. Like, how many of you actually know that there's fuel in the tank when you get on the plane? Anybody? Like, if that's your job, please do that. For the rest of us, but none of us. None of us. You don't have to know everything about Jesus. See, the Pharisees are trying to say, tell us, is He a sinner or who is He? And the guy's just going, listen, I don't have all the facts, but here's a fact I have. I was blind from birth. He did something with my eyes, and now I know what color shirt you wear. Right? Do you get that? He's like, I don't know everything. I can't tell you everything. I haven't read the whole Bible, but I'm just telling you, I was blind. He came to me. He did something to my eyes, and now I see for the very first time ever. And it's interesting. They're going to ask him to repeat his story over and over and over again. If you have a Bible in front of you, I want to show you 4 places where they want to get the story straight. Do you have anybody in your life that you have to continually tell the story to? Anybody that asks you to repeat what you just told them over and over? You can point to them right here. Seriously. You can literally point to him. It probably goes with my impatience thing, I'm sure. But I'm just like, yeah, you told me that 15 times. Seriously, in the last 24 hours, you told me that 15 times. And so that's what the Pharisees are doing, because they can't believe They can't believe that there's someone. See, they can't control Jesus. This is really where they begin to start thinking about why they're going to kill Jesus. So I'm going to show you 4 places in this passage and just see how the Pharisees respond. In verse 10, we'll look at 10, 15, 19, and 26. So in verse 10, the Pharisees said to him, "Then how were your eyes open?" It's going to be humorous in a moment. In verse 15, so the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Verse 19, now they go to his parents. Never play the parent card. Right? Man, well, anyway, I won't go there. Never forget when I broke up with this girl in college. Going home, I was like very relieved that the relationship was over. I go home and her car's at my parents' house. Terrible. Never play the parent card. Anyway. No, I'm not married to her today, in case you're wondering. In verse 19, Pharisees ask the boy's parents. The man's parents, they say, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" Look at verse 26. The Pharisees said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" They don't care. They want to control the situation, so they're just trying to get him to change his story. And the guy's going, "Listen, I don't know everything about this man, but I know this. I was blind and now I can see. That's all I've got. And for you to know that Jesus can affect your life without you having all of the answers." I have a friend who says it like this when he put faith in Jesus, and I love this language that he uses. He says that I gave as much as I knew about myself to as much as I knew about Jesus. It's a great starting place, and that's the only place any of us could start. Give as much as we know about ourselves. We're going to learn more about who we are. We're going to learn more about who Jesus is. But he said, I gave as much as I knew about me to as much as I knew about Jesus. And that's what's going on with this man. Now let's pick it up in verse 32 through 38. But again, he's just going, this is my story. This is my story. And he doesn't change. In verse 32, they've gone on, and this is the man who now sees speaking. He says, "Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" He's got to be thinking, man, listen, you guys might be smart, but I've been trying to teach you for a while now. They're like, you're a sinner? To the blind man, they're going like, "You're a sinner? Would you teach us?" And they cast him out. Do you know why they cast him out? Because he introduced them to a God who didn't do things the way they made God do. Does that make sense? Like he's telling them about something that happened that's beyond their control. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast the man out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The blind guy that's now seeing answers, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Here's a real beautiful moment and ending to the story. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." And the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. I want to show you how we can see things really the same way as other people and yet be on the two complete opposite sides of this issue. Both the Pharisees and the man who used to be blind believed that this only could be an act of God. Let me show you, verse 24. In verse 24, for a second time they called the man, these are the Pharisees who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God, we know that Jesus is a sinner." Now let me explain what's going on. What they're saying is, hey, they're telling this man, don't give credit to Jesus. Making someone see is only something that God can do. Give glory to God, not to this man. This is going to be a huge sort of pronouncement in all of history, and maybe new for you this morning. So the Pharisees are saying, don't give credit to Jesus. This is something only God could do. And yet the man who used to be blind, he says the same thing, but he spins it a little different. Look at 32 and 33. He says the same thing, he just spins it a little different. This man says, "Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of the man born blind." So speaking of Jesus, the man who now sees says, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They're saying the same thing about the activity. They're both saying if you were blind from birth and now you see, that must be an act of God. You see that? But the Pharisees are saying, since that must be an act of God, this Jesus guy who's going to claim to be the Messiah, he couldn't have done this. But the guy who's been personally affected, remember, when the story is personal to you, no one can take that away, right? So when God does something transformative in your life, it doesn't matter what the pastor says about it. It really doesn't matter what your parents say about it. It doesn't even matter what your spouse says about it. If you've experienced that personally, then you know, and there's nothing we can do to take that from you. And so this guy goes, hey, I've told you my story all day long. You're right. Never has it been heard since in the history of the world that someone that was born who couldn't see, could they now see? Surely this man must come from God. You know what he was essentially saying? Surely this man must be God. Look at his response in verse 37. Or 38 actually. Jesus reveals who he is to this man. This man does two things. He expresses faith in Jesus. Lord, I believe. And then he worships him. He expresses his faith in Jesus, and then he worships him. Hard reality to get, but I want to share it with you. I never want to tell you guys something that I don't necessarily think is true. So I'm going to tell you, here's what I know to be true. Some of you have circumstances in your life that you can't stand right now, and some of you are never going to have those circumstances change. Yeah, pray for them. Listen. Some of you are going to get cancer in your lifetime. People are going to pray. You are going to be healed. Some of you are going to get cancer in your lifetime. You're going to live the right life. You're going to have people praying for you, and you won't be healed. How do I know this? Because Jesus is about to go to the cross, and he says to God the Father, God, if you can take this suffering from me, do it. And because God has something better in mind, he allows him to suffer on the cross. And he doesn't even answer the prayer that Jesus offered. So what I will never stand up and say to you is that, hey, God wants to change every one of your circumstances. Some of your circumstances, though, he does. But here's what I can tell you. Every time, God does want to change you. Like some of you, the space where the deficiency is, God's going to remove this space. He's going to grow you by just taking away your circumstance, like he does for this man. But for some of you, it's not going to go away. But how he's going to close the gap in the space that exists is to help you have joy in the midst of it, to trust that he's good in the midst of it. And the question that you and I have to wrestle with every week, but especially when we come face to face with our own story, is can we put faith in this kind of God? Who even when we can't see it has our best interest at heart? Who even when we can't explain. See, the Pharisees wanted to know the how, right? How many of you are why people? Myself is my hands up. Anybody else? Like you've got to know why it works, how it works? The Pharisees are like that. Like, why? Like, what's your story? Why? What's the difference? What's the big deal? And some of us need to release that a little bit in our spirit and quit worrying about the why and the how and worry about the who. Some of us need to release ourselves to a who, not a how. Some of us believe that before we ever put faith, really active faith in a God who exists, we've got to have the how figured out. And yet, just as we sang a song, Mystery, a second ago, there's a sense of mystery to this whole thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be faith. Question is, how are you going to respond? Like, what's the next move for you? What's your next step in this faith journey? I love what God's doing in our church, and here's what I never want to be true. I never want all of us to be at the same place spiritually. That'd be a little bit boring, right? We couldn't learn from each other. We're sort of all the same. A lot of chiefs probably in that moment, not a lot of Indians. But here's what I do want for all of us sort of moving towards taking our next step toward who God is and what he wants for us to be and what he wants for us to become. And I just want to ask you, as I do every Sunday, to consider what this means for you. Can you trust a God like this? Who even when he won't change your circumstance, he'll be with you in the midst of it. The Bible says that God will never leave us nor forsake us, that he'll be with us. Paul, who was one of the most spiritual men that ever lived, he begged God to take a pain from him. And you know what God said to this real spiritual, godly man? Starts with an N, ends in an O.
No.
Come on, play along. Remember, I'm a parent to preschoolers. You got to play with me here. No. He said no. And he said to him, you're going to stay weak in that area. But my grace is sufficient for you. Every one of us in this room, if we were honest, we would say, God, I'm not as interested in you changing me as I am in you changing my circumstance, right? Like, I want my circumstances different sometimes. But the best thing for us is to be changed more than our circumstances being changed. And that's the story that you're invited into this morning. You want to play your part? Let's pray. Brad's going to come and lead us just in a sort of a response time here at the end. And I just want to say again to you, there's room for you in our church. For the biggest skeptic or you the most powerful Christian alive, there's a place for you. But let's just don't sit and go, okay, I'll do it again next week. Let's really examine, okay, what's my story? Not what the pastor's story or what's my small group leader's story or what's my spouse's story even. Like, what is my story? What is reality for me? And I want to pray specifically that God would overwhelm you with a sense of who He is. And at the same time, you're not going to get all the answers. Keep seeking, keep growing, keep learning and seeking knowledge of who He is. But on what you know tonight, or this morning, can you give as much as you know about yourself to as much as you know about Him and place your faith in Him? God, I pray that you would lead people in this room before we leave here this morning to place faith in you. We've been around this thing. We've heard others' stories. But yet, God, we're distant. We're not participants yet. God, I believe you're writing a beautiful story, and I believe you've invited all of us in this room into it. God, I pray that we would receive that invitation. And God, that we'd place faith in you. And we would be affected by you long before we know everything about you. And God, could we even this morning give thanks for the space that exists in our lives where you're going to fill it so that you get the credit. So we value you and we, with humility, say, God has done a great thing in my life. God, you brought all of us far from where we were. Would you keep doing that? In Jesus' name.